everyone, welcome back to Let's Talk. I'm John, and today we're going to be talking about the 1968 horror classic, Night of the Living Dead. We're also going to be talking about its brand new Criterion 4K Blu-ray release that was just released. But before we dive into all that, if you are a fan of 4K Blu-ray reviews, movie reviews, tech reviews, and game reviews, we try and do them all here on the channel. Nothing would help us out more than by you liking this video and subscribing to the channel. So in 1968, Night of the Living Dead was released. It's directed by George A. Romero, co-written by George A. Romero, edited by George A. Romero, and he also was the cinematographer on this film. George A. Romero is one of the most legendary directors of all time. Without George A. Romero and Night of the Living Dead, we wouldn't have the zombie culture that we have now. There would be no Walking Dead. There would be no zombie mode in the Call of Duty games. There would be no Left 4 Dead. We wouldn't get all the awesome sequels that we got. We wouldn't get the 2003 remake of Dawn of the Dead from Zack Snyder. All these great zombie properties in the horror genre. Zombie horror has become one of the most popular horror subgenres of all time, especially over the last 20 years. Zombie horror has taken off in a way that we never could have imagined, especially in 1968. Zombies had already existed, but the way, the look, and the movements, and the zombie rules had never hit the heights that they had ever hit before until 1968 when George A. Romero and his co-writer on this, John Russo, had a vision, and they wanted to make that vision come to life because this film had a budget of only $100,000. Yeah, that's pretty good for 1968, but these guys had never made a movie before. They had only made commercials. They really were into guerrilla filmmaking, and they decided that they wanted to live their dream, and they were going to make a movie their way. And they pretty much did. They made one of the most famous movies ever made, working with a low budget, a horror movie at that, which at the time only really received Saturday morning matinee viewings. And at the time also, they cast a black man in Dwayne Jones in the lead of this film, which think about it, in 1968, that was a huge deal as well. And to have the violence and gore that is in this film, imagine seeing this in 1968, how shocking that would have been. Everyone always talks about how shocking seeing The Exorcist was, but imagine seeing this in 1968. This actually came out before the MPAA rated films, so actually Roger Ebert tells an amazing story about how when he first saw this movie, there was a 9-year-old girl sitting across the aisle from him, just sitting there in shock and crying because she had no idea what she was seeing, because at the time, anyone could have saw this film, including kids. And just imagine seeing that scene. A mother's daughter comes back to life and is now one of the living dead and just kills her. Imagine seeing that at 9 years old in 1968. It really can't be undersold how shocking that must have been, because I watched this last night for this review, and even I was like, wow, that is very violent, especially for the time. But even now, I was like, it gets under your skin a little bit, especially with that amazing score playing underneath this whole film. And that score actually is the same thing. That just came from a library. That anyone could have used that music. The way that they got around every corner that they had to cut to make it, and the fact that it came out this good is incredible, because this film moves along at a pretty good pace. It doesn't feel slow. It doesn't feel like a lot of 1960s films like you would imagine that it's going to be slow and boring. The pacing itself is very good and holds up extremely well. The editing itself, I think, was the shining star of this. George A. Romero edited this film himself, and the editing is phenomenal. I don't know how he did it, especially since before this, he had only shot commercials, and it's incredible what he did with, barely knowing what he was doing, and just knowing that he had to get the B-roll shots, and how he had to edit it together in the end, the great use of camera, because he's also the cinematographer, the angles that he used. Again, these are all things that would be copied in later years, but if you want to see where it originally came from, that's what makes this film so historically significant. Is it as good as 1978's Dawn of the Dead? Absolutely not. It is not. I prefer Dawn of the Dead. I prefer Day of the Dead over this film any day of the week, but you have to see it if you're a fan of horror or you're just a fan of film, this is one of those movies that are so historically significant, you have to see it. It did so much, not just for film, for indie filmmaking, for the horror genre in general, for the subgenre of zombie horror. It's all here. You could just see where it all started, and it started in 1968 with a director and a writer who just had a dream, who made a production company and said, you know what, you get one shot at life, let's take our shot. And who would have thought what George A. Romero would become after this film, and all the great sequels we got, and the crazies. There's so much good that came out of this film. If you've not seen Night of the Living Dead yet, it's one of the easiest films to actually see, because this is another one that's actually in the public domain. So there are so many different Blu-ray, DVD, and VHS releases. You could probably stream it anywhere, because nobody has the rights to this. Everybody, if I wanted to today, I can go put out a Blu-ray copy of this, but it will not look as good as this Criterion 4K Blu-ray that we're about to talk about. So Criterion has just released this new 4K Blu-ray of Night of the Living Dead. Now, this might look familiar to you because in 2018 they did release a Blu-ray version of the same exact film. Now, that 2018 Blu-ray was actually overseen by George A. Romero and John Russo. So they saw over the transfer. It was a 4K transfer. I don't think they used the original film negative. I believe they had a copy of the film, but that's the film version that they used to compress it and transfer it to a 4K scan with the original audio. And now 4 years later, we're receiving that original 4K scan in its original 4K transfer instead of being compressed down to 1080p, because the original Blu-ray that came out in 2018, yes, it's a 4K scan, but it was compressed down and the audio was compressed. So this is just an uncompressed version of that exact same film. So on this set you get, it's the same exact box art. Now this does bother me. I don't like that Criterion does this. They've been doing this lately. We talked about it in my blowout review, and they did it with Mulholland Drive and a lot of other 4Ks that have already had Blu-ray releases where they're just releasing them with the 4K disc in there, but it's the exact same packaging. There is no difference in it. All you get in this entire package is a brand new 4K scan and that new 4K disc. Everything else is the same. This reading material that does unfold out into a poster, and a really nice looking poster at that, actually. So it's the exact same one that you have from 2018. Now, I do love the design of this. I really do. I like that they did the 3-disc design. I like that each disc has their own art design on it. They didn't cut any corners on that. The packaging itself is just classic Criterion clear case packaging, which is always good. It's one of the nicer standard packaging from any company. I would say they're right up there with Arrow Video as far as making really nice packaging and having their own design. The cases are thick, they don't feel like they're going to break, and they look nice on your shelf. But the only issue, like I said, it's the same exact version of this film from 2018. So if you have that Blu-ray from 2018, you have the exact same scan of this 4K. The only difference is you're going to get that 4K resolution boost. There is no difference. There is no Dolby Vision. There is no HDR. So all you're going to get is a resolution boost from that. So what you're getting is the uncompressed version. The audio is exactly the same. It's a 1.0. This was filmed in 1968, but the audio itself is actually really good. Even though it's a 1.0, you got to understand it's a 1968 film. So everything is just on one track. So, you know, the score still has to play underneath the dialogue, and it's really hard to adjust those levels, but they did an amazing job on that. Other than some echoing, which again, you know, it's in a farmhouse, it's pretty wide open. It does a really good job. It doesn't feel like, if you've seen some old films from the 60s, especially some with this low of a budget, the audio is very, very impressive, and I know that they saw over the audio, making sure it was as perfect as it could possibly be, and it really is. Even in other versions, if you've seen VHS or DVD copies of this, they really cleaned up the audio. The visuals are cleaned up beyond belief since then. I mean, it looks clear as day. Now, the only thing that really does hurt it is the lack of Dolby Vision and HDR. Now, I don't know why they chose not to throw some Dolby Vision or HDR over it and just release that uncompressed version for everyone. I'm not too sure what the reasoning is exactly, but I think it really would have actually helped it. It is very hard to notice the difference. There are some scenes where I was looking in the farmhouse where it was a lot clearer and you definitely can pinpoint the moments, but overall, I don't see a huge jump from that 1080p Blu-ray from 4 years ago. I really think if you already have this set and you just wanted to see if it's worth the upgrade to the 4K disc, I really don't think it is. I myself didn't own this set before. This is the first time I've ever owned the film in general. I've seen this film a bunch of times. Actually, the first time I ever saw this was in school. Seeing it from then to now, it has increased in quality incredibly, but the increase in quality from that 1080p Blu-ray from 4 years ago to now is very minimal at best. You have all the same extras on there. There is nothing new. The only difference is that one 4K disc. Everything else, all the extras, all the interviews, everything else, which is a whole third disc in this set, by the way. There is a whole extra disc of extras, and they're all done amazingly well. There is no making of documentary, which I always prefer, but there is plenty of featurettes, interviews with, Guillermo del Toro, Frank Darabont, all talking about how this movie influenced them and their filmmaking. I mean, the extras are just great, and the fact that they're on a whole nother disc is just amazing. I really do love this entire set, but if you already own that 1080p Blu-ray set, I don't see a reason to upgrade unless you're like me, you never owned this before physically, or you just own a really cheap copy of this physically. I would say definitely upgrade to this. If you have that Blu-ray from a few years ago from Criterion, I don't see any reason to do it. You don't even get new box art. just keep what you got, and the 4K is for people who have never owned this film before or own a really cheap copy of it, because you're just getting that 4K disc and you're just getting an uptick in resolution. You're really just taking that and just uncompressing it. That's really all you're getting with this package. But if you've never owned it before, it is really great to have on your shelf. It is one of the most historically significant films. And if you're a film fan or a film collector, you're just going to want to have this just because, you know, it means something. It's the one that started it all, and you're going to want to have that. It really would have benefited a lot from that HDR and Dolby Vision. I've reviewed quite a few 4K Blu-rays that actually do black and white transfers, like The Killing or Paths of Glory from Kino Lorber this year, or Touch of Evil from Kino Lorber. And all those looked so much better because those had the benefits of HDR on them. And it really made the blacks darker, and it made just the whites and grays pop a little more. Whereas this, it kind of had a faded look where the HDR would have really helped it. And I'm not too sure what the reasoning is. Maybe, you know, George A. Romero has passed away since he oversaw the original restoration. That's my only guess, but I really do think maybe down the line I would love to see them put Dolby Vision over this. Maybe it's sacrilege to do that because of how culturally significant this film is. You don't want to touch it up too much, but they did a great job here as far as upticking the resolution. This is the best scan of the film you can get right now, so if you don't own this at all, I can recommend this 110%. You will not be disappointed. It's just something that you really are going to want to have on your shelf. So if you don't own it, I can recommend it highly. If you already do own this, I can say probably give it a skip. There is no reason for you to upgrade to a 4K Blu-ray of this. So overall, what would I give this? I would probably give this set overall an 8 out of 10. If this is the first time we ever got this, this is a 9.5 out of 10 scan. I would have just been upset that we never got Dolby Vision on it, and I would have just took a half a point off for that, and that's it. You know, no lack of HDR, I would have just done that. But the fact that this is the exact same disc, just uncompressed from 4 years ago, I have to take some points off for the lack of change in the art design of the casing, and the lack of anything new added other than that 4K disc. You know, we see this all the time with companies like Scream Factory, where they upgrade their already existing discs, but they change the packaging or throw a steelbook out there to really make it beneficial to the collector. And Criterion isn't doing that yet, and I'm not too sure what their reasoning is, other than the fact that when you go on their website, they did this when they switched from DVD to Blu-ray too. They never changed the box art, Criterion, very much. Once that title is added to the collection, they don't really update it. The side of the box, once it's added to the Criterion collection, they don't change the art. And I understand that. They are very much, you know, that kind of studio that is trying to bring to you the importance of the art form, and they don't feel like they're trying to sell you something. They feel more like they're trying to preserve film and film history. And I think they do a phenomenal job at that. I've said it on this channel before. I think that they are the leader in boutique studios, but I still think I would love for them to actually take a little bit more of an effort, just help out the collector a little bit more, especially if you want to. I don't know if they're interested in selling this again, or if they're just trying to get this to people like me who don't own the film already. I'm not too sure what Criterion's reasoning is for never updating the box art once it's already been released. They just add new discs. They did it from DVD to Blu-ray, and now Blu-ray to 4K. But for me, I would personally love it if they just updated the box art just a little bit, just to make it worthwhile for people who already own this and they just want to upgrade, because it's very hard to justify upgrading just for a 4K disc, even if it's a significant update, just in the fact that, you know, these are not cheap discs, and Criterion's has a couple sales a year, but other than that, 35 to 40 bucks a disc, and it's hard to justify me telling somebody to upgrade from the same exact packaging just for an uncompressed 4K disc. So that's going to do it here for me, guys. If you are a fan of Let's Talk, nothing would help us out more than by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We will actually have an Amazon affiliate link, so if you want to pick up this or the 1080p disc, we have a link in our description for this. That really helps us out too, and it's no cost to you guys. It just helps the channel out so we can keep bringing these reviews to you. So guys, that's going to do it here for me. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and tell all your friends.